agenda looking? So how is our agenda looking today? I've introduced myself as Rita Mboko today, and I've introduced our co-hosts who are with me today. And we have Dr. Achieng who will take us through the context setting. She'll introduce herself, talk about us as a global compact South Africa, tell us why we are here again, and deep diving why we are focusing on climate action today in our webinar today. And we'll hear from Mandy, as I said. She'll deep dive into climate action, talk specifically about just any transition in Eskom, what's happening there, and also looking at the climate action in general within the lens of women today, in honor of Women's Month, as we close off Women's Month. And at 1:15, Dr. Achieng will moderate the Q&A and ask Mandy some questions. And I'm sure already some of you already have questions for Mandy already. And also through the chat, we'll look at the chat and see what you have asked. And you'll also be allowed, if time allows, for you to ask the questions live. And I will close with the next steps and just really closing off this webinar. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Achieng to take us through the context setting. Over to you, Dr. A. You're muted. Yeah. You're muted, Dr. A.
Okay, I'll start over. I'm still unmuted or muted 2 years down. Apologies. Thank you, Retabile. Thank you, all of you, for joining us this afternoon. I have been introduced. I am the Executive Director for the Global Compact Network in South Africa. Really grateful to have Mandy with us this morning. And Mandy, I will introduce Mandy towards the end and just say a few words before I hand over to her. But right now about the Global Compact, many of you are from participating companies. We were established back in 2000 following one of Kofi Annan's, the late Kofi Annan's speeches at Davos, when he proposed a compact between business and other stakeholders. And Andre, just put yourself on mute. Thank you. And following that speech, a few CEOs felt excited by the idea of a compact between business, the UN government bringing other key stakeholders to advance corporate citizenship. Fast forward, up to now, we've been working on supporting, enabling business to understand what we call the 10 principles on human rights, on labor protection, on the environment, and on anti-corruption. These are very inward-looking. I always say very inward-looking into the behavior or the impact of business on human rights, on labor, on the environment, on anti-corruption. And then in 2015, an additional framework through the SDGs. And now we say that we drive. We use a principle-based approach as we support businesses to realize these imperatives. Next slide. And so in 2022, we have grown since 2000 to over 15,000 companies around the world. If you remember, the Global Compact is a public commitment. So companies come through their CEOs and make this public commitment to those principles and to advancing societal goals. We also are a multi-stakeholder platform. So over 3.8 thousand of our participants are from your NGO, government, or cities, and other stakeholders, employer organizations, and so on and so forth. We have participants in over 160 countries. We have networks like South Africa that where we are based. We have over 69 local networks across the world with a massive footprint if you count, if you look at employees or the reach of companies. Over 87 million employees across the world. So if you were to think about sustainability and the influence that companies have by doing good, it's a massive influence. Next slide. And so how do we support companies? We enable them to drive impact on specific goals and on the 10 principles. We, at the same time, help them to scale up ambitious action because of that footprint I just talked about. If you look at companies, they're in different geographies, they're of different sizes, they're in different sectors, they have massive value chain. We use that entire ecosystem to enable companies to scale their actions. And then we also support them to make measurable progress through reporting. Thank you. Next slide. And so I talked about driving specific goals. We have gone into the SDGs and looked at the principles. And we say that companies, really when they focus on these 7 selected areas of change, this is the areas where they can have outsized effects on outcomes. So there are certain things business can really do well to drive change across all the SDGs. And there are these 7 areas at the moment: on human rights, on labor, on climate change, which is our center for discussion today, on anti-corruption and transformational governance. Sometimes we look at it, through the same lens of SDG 16, and through SDG integration deeply into the business. And the other one is on gender equality. Next slide. So how do we do this? What are the avenues that we use to support businesses to scale? How do we enable them to scale their ambitious actions? Through connecting, learning, leading, and communicating. And we do this through a variety of ways. Many of you know this, through events where companies come, like today. We just learn from each other. Through the academy, which is our online platform for training and virtual sessions. Through peer learning groups. These are small groups of companies coming together on specific issues. Then we have the accelerators. And those are our programs. We now deliver in South Africa in 4 distinct areas. And that is on the youth and innovation, on the SDGs, on climate ambition, on the SDG ambition, and on target gender equality. The other avenue is through policy advocacy and campaigns, and through Think Labs. We used to call Think Labs action platforms, if you've been part of the action platforms. These are small groups of companies, maybe 20 to 30 globally, that come together. And this is where a lot of our IP comes from, whether it's guidance notes or practice notes, or they're the ones who decide if we're going to have accelerators. I think the most important thing is that the value we deliver, the tools that we develop, are developed by small groups of companies. And that's why they're so relevant for business, because they're based on what companies actually experience on the ground. Next slide. And so reporting is really important because it drives transparency. And so we advocate disclosure. And for a long time, there are companies who've done some good work, even though we are all on a journey towards transformation. But we really advocate that companies report back on their progress. And we have a framework, we call it a communication on progress, and companies have to submit this annual report to maintain the integrity of themselves and of their information, but also the integrity of the global compact. We are transitioning to a new digital platform and moving away from asking companies to submit their sustainability reports. We are moving to a metrics-based reporting framework from next year. We have been communicating this to companies that we work with, but the whole idea is to drive transparency, to be able to have authentic data that is comparable, that is trackable, and that can enable companies to drive to drive change. So we are actually socializing this at the moment, and the companies that participate with us would have received information to come in and understand what is changing from 2023. Next slide. Today, we'd like to talk about women and climate action, and why this is important for us. Climate change is a global priority. Climate action is a global priority. And it is also Women's Month. We are crowning it off today. And for us, it's not just during Women's Month that we commemorate the women who have gone before us, who have really fought for the freedom that we enjoy today. But in this discussion, let me introduce Mandy first and then come to the core of what we'd like to talk about today. For me, usually when people come to me because we are in the Global Compact, they say, Achieng, we'd like to, understand if there are women out there who can speak on climate, who do work on climate. The one person that normally comes to my mind is Mandy. Mandy is the general manager in the group office, CEO of Eskom Holdings, and the managing the just energy transition. In this role, Mandy oversees the just energy transition strategy. She has over 20 years experience at Eskom. She has developed numerous climate change and sustainable development related strategies for Eskom. And Mandy was instrumental in driving Eskom's efforts in this regard over very many years. For a long time, Mandy also has been a member of the South African delegation to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And through this, she has really, amassed a wealth of experience. At the moment, Mandy has also been appointed to serve on the South African Presidential Climate Commission that will drive South Africa's just transition plans. I'm gonna leave it there and go back to why we are having this discussion today, crowning off Women's Month. I said earlier that climate is a global priority, and for South Africa, it is an urgent priority as well. So in this discussion, what we'd like to do is to locate within the transformation that is taking place through climate action, position women in there and ask a few questions. In understanding this impact, we'd also like to understand what are the risks, what are the impacts of women, why is it really important for women to be considered within the transformation that is taking place, because as we move to a low carbon economy, there's a massive transformation that is required. And I want to say upfront that it's not just in the energy sector, but the energy sector will drive the bulk of that transformation. So there are risks. We are sitting with climate impacts. We are sitting with the risks that might be associated as we go through that economic change, moving from a very high intensive coal-based to a low carbon economy. What are the risks that are involved there? Most importantly, how do we mitigate those? How do we handle those? For us, from where we sit in the Global Compact, we also must unpack, and I think this is important for government as well. What are the opportunities that exist for women? Even if we just narrow it down through the process of the just energy transition, right? We know that we exist within a global framework, so there's a lot of geopolitics that are involved. How is South Africa positioned within the geopolitics? Are we really at the table? I think for me, that's really an important question. And then the big word is the just transition. I know in discussions on climate, it's always, I was telling Mandy earlier, it's always been considered very technical, and there's elements of it that is quite technical. But since the impact is on all of us, how do we bring it down to a level that we can all understand? So what does the just transition mean broadly? What does it mean for South Africa, right? And the big word then is, what does women inclusion mean within the framework of the just energy transition? So I'm going to leave it here for now, and Mandy will present. After Mandy presents, I'll then unpack some of these questions with her, and then we will also open it up to the floor. I would encourage you to also type your questions in the chat. But now let me hand over to Mandy. Welcome, Mandy. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Asheng. I'm really excited about being here to share the just energy transition plans of Eskom, but to also have a discussion with you and everybody else around the role of women. I am going to share my slides, so tell me when you can see it. And then while I'm doing that, just to say thank you again to you, to Rita Bilia, to the team for the excellent preparations in getting this conference done. And I think it's a really, really important topic. So Acheng, can you see my slides?
Yes, very clear. Thank you.
All right. So I'm not going to talk through all the details on the slide because I think it's very important to get to the point where we can actually have a conversation about this and discuss this topic of just transition. I've put in your topic on the top there, the compact dialogues on the SDGs about women in climate action and the importance of accelerating women's inclusion, and also to talk about, your topic again, building back better for women's improved resilience. And what I thought I would do is, include your topics on the slide because it also has quite a lot of resonance with what we're doing in the Just Transition Office at Eskom. So when we talk about the just energy transition, I talk about opportunities for a low carbon, socially inclusive growth and local industrialization, because the just energy transition is not just about decarbonization. So it's not just the low carbon part, which is extremely important, but very importantly, socially inclusive growth and localization in our country. So I just want to go through some context and background. Like I said, I won't talk through all the details, but one of the biggest areas that will be impacted by the transition is Mpumalanga, where most of our power stations are. But I wanted to just put some stats on the table for you before we go on, because one of the, I can start off with one of the criticisms we get of the Just Energy Transition Plan is you're shutting down coal plants, aren't you going to be losing jobs? But what we can see if you look at Mpumalanga is that we already have a status quo that is not working. But let me start globally, right? So when we talk about why do we focus on women in climate, why is there a whole agenda item in the climate change negotiations on gender equality and inclusion of women in climate change? It's because women and girls are disproportionately vulnerable to climate impacts. And if you look at some of the stats, some of the research work done by the UNDP, it says that 80% of the people most affected by climate change are women. Also, if you don't include women in your solutions, you're excluding more than half of the world's population. So including women, and I've got a slide later on that talks about how we can do this and why we should do this, why it's important. So that's globally, at a global context. If we come home in South Africa, so over 2021, we lost, there were 1.4 million fewer jobs in 2021 than in 2020. So COVID had an impact there, but we know that our economy is not growing in any case. But amongst the women, the rate of unemployment was 3.5% higher than among the male counterparts. So it shows that the South African labor market is more favorable towards men than towards women. And this is a study that was done by the World Bank. They looked at it's actually a very interesting report to read called the South African Gender Assessment. If you Google it, you'll find it. And that women are more likely than men to live below the poverty line, with Black women in South Africa being the poorest. And then if we delve down even further, if you increase the resolution of that, and if you come into Mpumalanga, you would see that Mpumalanga already has one of the highest unemployment rates in our country, and youth unemployment is about 58%, 59%, and 66%, 66.5% for young women. Household dependence on coal is very high. The informal economy is very poorly understood in Mpumalanga. And in 2019, 47.3% of the Mpumalanga province or population lived below the poverty line, which is 810 Rand per month. So I know this is painting a very bleak picture. And what we're trying to do with the Just Energy program, the Just Energy Transition program, is to say, how do we return economic activity back into Mpumalanga? How do we improve lives and improve the current status quo? So what we're looking at in repowering and repurposing our sites is to provide the opportunity for job creation, retraining, upskilling, reskilling, and ensuring that communities benefit, communities from around our power stations. So besides the issues around unemployment and jobs, bear in mind also that in Mpumalanga, we have many mine-affected communities. We have over, and this, when I first saw this study and this work that was done by the Energy Research Group in Cape Town, I was actually gobsmacked that we have over 700 abandoned mines in the region where they haven't been properly closed from a social and environmental perspective. And, if you go back and look at why is Mpumalanga so polluted, why is it in such poverty, we can trace it back to a number of these issues. So bear in mind that also we have air and water pollution, degraded land. It is the most polluted catchment in South Africa, highest air quality issues in terms of SOx and NOx. So the sulfides of the oxides of sulfur and the oxides of nitrogen. If you drive, we often go to Malahleni in Mpumalanga to Steve Tshwete municipality, because that is where one of our power stations that is shutting down next month is, Komati Power Station. And if you drive there on a day like this, it's quite dull here in Joburg today. If you drive there on a day like this, you can just see the fog, the smog, the pollution levels in that area. So, there's this conundrum we're dealing with high environmental health issues, with job losses, job creation that we need to have, and with social impacts. And we find that women are, like I say, disproportionately vulnerable to these impacts. And then globally as well, if you go to the UN Women website and look at some of the research work that they've done, women are restricted from working in certain jobs or industries in almost 50% of countries. And if you go into that report, you will look at those countries, in mostly developing countries, unfortunately, where there's still such a disparity around how women are viewed. We know in some countries, South Africa does a lot better than other countries, but we know in some countries, women are still seen as what's called second-class citizens. And so these are the kinds of things that in the programs we work on, we absolutely must be very cognizant of and look at how we can change. So that was just to paint the picture and give you some context on the angle of today's discussion, which is around the focus on women. But these next couple of slides, I want to talk about the Eskom Just Energy Transition Plan. And when we talk about Just Energy Transition, the JET, as we call it for short, we're talking about a transition towards a low carbon, climate resilient economy. Now, if you look at the topic of today, of the entire dialogue, it's about how do we make women more resilient? And we're also talking about how to make the economy more resilient to climate change. And, people often used to say climate change is an environmental issue. It is absolutely not. Yes, it has an impact on the environment, but it has a huge impact on the economy. So we need to make sure that our economy is climate resilient. And what do I mean by that? Is that firstly, we are actually impacted by the actual changes to the climate. So when we're having, you saw the floods in KZN, when we have extreme weather events, when we have very high fire danger days, very high ambient temperature days, it has an impact on infrastructure. So it's a huge risk that we have to abate. And so the economy is very, very vulnerable to climate change in South Africa. We are susceptible to floods, to droughts, to extreme weather events, things that we've never experienced before. We've always had a very moderate climate as a country. So when we talk about the just energy transition, it's not just about reducing emissions, but reducing our vulnerability to actual climate change and making ourselves more resilient. But we have to do this in a way that does not impede socioeconomic development, that we result in an increase in sustainable jobs. And I think what's extremely important to point out is that the JET is not a sudden shift in economic activity. We're not going to shut down coal plants tomorrow. We have a very phased program, also based on the economic life of these plants and the operational operability of the plants as they reach their end of life. So it's a phased, it's a shift in economic activity that occurs in a phased manner over time. So what are we planning on doing on this just energy transition? If you look at the shutdown, it requires power station and mine sites to be rehabilitated, and then you just return the land back to the way it was and you leave. But what we want to do with repowering and repurposing is to continue to use these sites meaningfully. So continue to have activities that will create jobs, that will keep people in jobs, that will create revenue streams. So job creation and making sure that the communities that surround these areas benefit from economic stimulation and new job creation. A lot of the communities in Mpumalanga sprung up because of either the power station and the mine or both. In some cases, those towns didn't exist without that. So if you're shutting down those activities, we want to make sure that you support those communities going forward. We have a potential for partnerships. We're not looking at just doing these things by ourselves as Eskom, but how do we partner with others in doing this, creating the potential for new revenue streams. If we do commit to a renewables build in this country, even if you're environmentally agnostic, even if you couldn't care less about the environment, renewables currently are the cheapest technologies that we can build. And what that does is if you create a pipeline of projects, you will then increase the scope for local manufacture and job creation, potential for skills development and retraining of our employees and communities. I must be very clear about what the just energy transition is not. It is not an exclusive transition that seeks to marginalize the majority. So it's not about a few elite people that know what this is about and are investing in it and will benefit from it. It's actually a plan on how do we benefit the majority of our country. It's not about meeting global pressures. A lot of people say, oh, this just energy transition thing is a Western concept. Actually, the just transition was coined by the International Labour Organization. It came about because the world was transitioning anyway. The global landscape was moving away from coal towards cleaner technologies. And so the International Labour Organization came up with this term called the just transition on, as we transition, just make sure we don't leave anybody behind. And that was the tagline, transitioning without leaving anybody behind. And it's not about exporting revenue and jobs. In fact, it's more about how do we continue to reindustrialize South Africa? So the just energy transition can really reignite reindustrialization in South Africa. We lost a lot of manufacturing capability over the years, and we want to see how do we reignite that. So there's not going to be a test on this slide for you to memorize. The slide is how many projects it is in. But just to show you that our JET project funnel has over 100 projects in the transmission space, in the generation space, and the distribution space. This is our typical project funnel where we look at projects that are in pre-planning and then projects that are in concept design. So we're busy doing the business cases for them. Then they're in definition phase and then execution when we're ready to go. So a lot of our projects are in definition phase. Most of them are in concept phase. And we have, these are the projects we've put forward for funding in terms of funding a transition in South Africa. A lot of the transmission projects is to do the grid development in the Northern Cape and Eastern Cape, and that is to enable additional investment. So if you look at the transmission network, we talk a lot about generation capacity, generally in the media and all of us, but we have quite a big problem in terms of the transmission network. So if you look at the western part of our country, the Western Cape, the Northern Cape, the Eastern Cape, that's where we have fantastic wind and solar resource. That's exactly where we don't have enough transmission grid. If you look at the northern part of our country, Mpumalanga, We have excellent transmission grid capacity. We'll have even more grid capacity as we shut down coal plant, but not the greatest wind and solar resource. But it may not be the greatest wind and solar resource in the country. It's not better than the Northern Cape, but it's better than many, many other countries around the world. That is the wind and the solar resource. So what we are saying is that Mpumalanga offers an immediate opportunity as we're shutting down coal plant. In fact, even without shutting down coal plant, we have a massive grid availability in Mpumalanga. So let's exploit that. Let's have a significant renewable investment in Mpumalanga right now. What it does is that it takes advantage of the people that we have there that are looking for jobs, and it takes advantage of the skills we have in the area already, artisan skills, people that have worked on power stations, people that have worked along the value chain that understand how that works. And so we're offering Eskom land in this area to project developers to come in and build renewable plants. I'm not sure, I'm hearing an echo. I'm not sure if that's just me. And then what we're saying is that we're not saying we're not going to develop the grid in the Northern Cape and East Cape, absolutely doing that in parallel. We do need to develop about 8,000 kilometers of line, over 100 transformers, 12 new substations. That's going to cost us a lot of money, and it's going to take a long time. So while we're doing that in parallel, we're also offering the immediate opportunity in Mpumalanga to increase our generation capacity. Then we also need to do some distribution grid expansion and improvements, modernizing our grid so that you can have bidirectional flow. People can sell back into the grid. So there's a number of these projects that are on the table in terms of jet financing. And like I say, there's opportunities to capitalize now on existing grid infrastructure. And so when we made our land available, we went out to the market in April with 4,000 hectares of land, 18 land parcels. It was oversubscribed. So there's huge appetite for developers to come onto the land and build plant. And just those 18 plants, 1,800 megawatts, 18 project developers will inject about 20 billion rands of investment in Mpumalanga. So that means more jobs, more revenue stream, and improving the economy in Mpumalanga already against the baseline of where we are. So if you look at South Africa's full transition plan, and don't fall off your chairs, but this is a huge amount of money. We're looking at about at least 1.2 trillion rand of investment that's required by 2030 in order for us to transition. So from a generation capacity perspective, just under R1 trillion, we're looking at a firm capacity of around 6 gigawatts to support the grid to ensure we have system flexibility, variable capacity of around 50 to 60 gigawatts of that, which is clean capacity, and then about 10 gigawatts of storage, so either battery or pumped hydro storage. I've spoken already about the transmission capacity infrastructure and distribution capacity infrastructure. So we do need a lot of investment in the energy sector in South Africa for the transition. So that's talking about the energy infrastructure, the generation plant, transmission, distribution plant that's required. What we already also did as part of the Just Energy Transition was socio-economic impact studies. We've completed these studies for 3 plants, Komati, Grootfontein, and Hendrina, and we've now got funding for 7 more studies. They're actually currently underway. And what we looked at is what is the impact of shutting down these coal plants on people, on the economy, on the environment, in a local context, in the regional context, and the national context. And we looked at elements like quality of life, out-migration, social ills, income levels, employment, government revenue, property, and then things like land use, quality of environment. So these are very, very detailed reports that have been completed. We're now going to start a stakeholder engagement process to work through the reports. We've made the reports publicly available, but not the detail, because some of the detail is sensitive to employees. And we're going to start a stakeholder engagement process in that. So what the reports do is it informs us on what will be the impact in the local areas, so Dipalasing municipality, Steve Tshwete municipality, where these power stations are. What is the impact in Mpumalanga, and what's the impact on South Africa? And from there, we look at what are the plans we can do to mitigate or ameliorate those risks, and what projects can we invest in to deal with the risks of plant shutdown. So we've now just started, like I say, 7 more studies. These power stations, Kendal, Kriel, Matla, Duva, Arnott, Tutuka, and Camden, most of them are not close to shutting down, but we want to make sure we do the studies very much in advance so that we can prepare in terms of when the plants start to shut down. Bear in mind that we don't shut down plants, we just shut down the whole plant overnight. We shut down a unit at a time over several years. And so we can plan in terms of how do you ameliorate the risks. So conducting those studies for all of these plants currently. So like I said, Komati Power Station is the first plant that will be completely shut down next month. We've got one unit running. We've been shutting down units over last couple of years. The 125 megawatt unit will be shut down next month. So we've already started embarking on the plans for repowering and repurposing Komati. We've done the engineering studies. The engineering studies tells us, if you look at this picture, where we can do some solar, where we can do batteries, possibly gas, wind. So the studies looked at what technologies are available, what is the cost of the technologies, and which technologies are best suited for which part of the plant. And then we're also looking at, so these are the plants we look at, the different technology options we're looking at. These are synchronous condensers, which are used for grid stability. We're also looking at repurposing activities. So it's not just the repowering, which is returning electricity, but also what are some of the activities we can use the sites for. So if you've been to a coal-fired power plant, it's a very huge piece of land, and there's various things you can do. One of the other things we're looking at is microgrid assembly. So if you can see this picture here, it's solar arrays. What it's sitting on is a number of awnings. The awnings are attached to a container, so a normal shipping container, which has been repurposed. It's got battery packs inside. It's got inverters inside. You can literally pack these panels inside the container and transport the whole container anywhere in the country and have it set up in a day or two for about 20 to 25 homes to electrify those homes. So we're partnering, or we're looking at using these in areas of the country that are not yet electrified, about 13% of our country, especially areas that are very hard to get the grid to. So this forms the ideal solution. It can last 15 to 20 years. If that area doesn't need it anymore, you can put it back on the truck and transport it somewhere else. And so this microgrid assembly, so putting together the container, putting together the battery packs, and installing the solar panels, we've moved that assembly plant from our research facility in Germiston to Komati Power Station. So Komati Power Station here has a number of warehouses and buildings that are not being used anymore because the plant's shutting down. So we repurpose those warehouses to assemble these microgrids, using staff, retraining staff in order to do that. We're also going to build a small agrivoltaics plant at Komati, which is, if you can picture solar panels on a frame and a gantry. They're slightly higher than normal so that you can do agricultural activities underneath that. So there's dual use of the land where we can look at what plants and crops using local farmers to supply local markets that can be planted there, while also using the land for electricity. So those are a number of activities we're looking at Komati. Another exciting opportunity we have at Komati is we are going to build a training facility. You may have seen it in the media last week, where we're partnering with Saratech, which is the South African Renewable Energy Training Center in the Western Cape. They are fully accredited, they're CETA accredited, they have all the right accreditation from the education bodies. And that is why we're partnering with them. They're fully South African, first South African training facility doing some great work. And we're partnering with them to build a training facility at Komati. So we want to do this in Mpumalanga, where we have the people that need to be trained. And they will be training artisans on our behalf, holding our hands until we can get Eskom accredited as a training center as well. So these are skills that are required for the renewables value chain. If you talk to the industry associations, they'll tell you we do not have enough skills in the country for the renewables pipeline that's coming. So this is for training people at our power stations, but also community members in order to upskill and reskill people. So those are the various things we have going on at Komati Power Station. What we're doing for the funding, so the infamous COP26 $8.5 billion funding that was premised on the Eskom plan that's been pledged to South Africa. What's been happening with that right now is the development of the investment plans. for the just energy transition for South Africa. And coming back to the story around women and the role of women, this will include gender-specific indicators disaggregated by various factors. And that is to deal with the context that I spoke about in the very first slide, where women are the most vulnerable. So not to disadvantage men in any way, we will have men employed and women employed, but also look at particularly how we include women more in the transition. So Komati is our pilot plant. It's going to cost a lot of money to decommission and to repower and repurpose. It's a very poorly, when I say it's a very poorly operated plant right now, in that it's at the end of its life. It's like driving a VW Beetle, the very old VW Beetle, 1960s VW Beetle, and trying to keep it going. And what we want to do is repower and repurpose the plant. And then we will have similar projects and initiatives at all of the power stations that we are planning on shutting down. But like I say, that's going to be over a number of years. This slide talks about, it's actually, I always say it's my no-brainer slide. What happens if we do nothing, if we just stay the way we are? We will continue to have increased unemployment. You see the number of people that are leaving the country, the skills drain, loss of manufacturing capability, poor environmental health, negative growth, divestment from our country, increasing cost of inefficient generation. But if we pivot towards a JET strategy, there's so many positives, from reindustrialization to new skills, to positive economic growth, environmental health improvement. And so, I always say the JET is not a panacea, but it comes very, very close. Through this implementation plan, we can add capacity, improve South Africa's competitiveness, and deal with a number of challenges that we have as a country. And if you look at the UN Women studies, they say, what are the ways to build better gender equality and sustainability in this whole transition plan? Some of the ideas that are on the table is around empowering women smallholders. So if you look at the last few decades, 55% of the improvement in food security has been from programs, or driven by programs that promote women empowerment. So when we look at some of these smaller agricultural type projects that we're looking at in parallel with the big power projects, we're looking at how do you also make sure you empower smallholders, because that has been proven through studies to generate more improvement in food security. Investing in care and protecting women's health, like I said earlier, women bear the brunt of climate-linked negative health outcomes. And so making sure that, we have the resources available to support women. So if you look at things like the microgrids, what the microgrids were used for in Lesotho was to electrify clinics where women are giving birth. In past, these clinics didn't have electricity. And so you can do things like that to improve the health and longevity of women and improve women's health. And then supporting women's leadership. So this is not stuff I'm making up. It's in studies that have been done by the UN Women Research Group. And it shows that at the national and community level, if you have more women representation in leadership, it drives better environmental outcomes. So the men on the call might say, oh, really, is that true? But I think actually, if you sit back and think about it at home, who makes you switch off the lights? Who makes sure you actually put the waste in the bin? Who makes sure that you don't do more washing or turn on the washing machine more than you need to? So if you look at that, if you escalate that up to leadership level in the communities, in government, it appears that when you have more women leaders, you drive better environmental outcomes. So countries that have higher percentages of women in parliament tend to adopt stricter climate policies. And so when we look at these programs, when we look at building, better policies for the future, we really need to look at how are we driving women in leadership roles as well. So I really like this picture how can we also as women make sure that we drive leadership from women in these areas. And I just wanted to say, just to end, that often when I mentor a number of young women, and often I have to say to them, you must bring your own unique talents and abilities to bear in your job. Don't think that you have to take on the role of a man if you're in a job in our industry, in particular in the energy industry, it's dominated by men. You do not have to behave like a man to get further in your place of work. You are blessed with unique talents and abilities, and that's what you need to bring to bear. And I like this quote that I see often that says, be yourself because everyone else is taken. So don't think you have to adopt a different role, a different stance, or be different in order to progress. I think bringing your unique talents and abilities to bear in your role is extremely important. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And Achieng, thank you very much. That was my last slide, and happy to get into a discussion.
Thank you very much, Mandy, for that comprehensive presentation. I have a few questions, and I know there are questions in the room as well. There are some that you have mentioned through your presentation, but you will excuse me for repeating some of them because I want us to drill down. And the one that keeps popping in my head is connected to, we have these massive opportunities coming up through the JET. You're closing up Komati, and so there are opportunities to add to the grid through solar, through battery storage, and a range, wind, renewables, right? And so for me, the issue of women entrepreneurship comes in. From where we sit in business, I'm aware that there's a lot of positioning to uptake this opportunity. It's happening even as we speak. The banks, the big businesses, they are well-known entrepreneurs positioning themselves. I want to go back to the meaning of the just transition. Over and above jobs, I know jobs is a big part of it. Upskilling is a big part of it because you're essentially changing technologies, right? And so upskilling is important. We have to manage the risk around making people unemployed where they have been employed because we are transitioning out of coal, for instance. But what does this mean for women entrepreneurs? How do they benefit through the just transition? Because I know that came out broadly in terms of reindustrialization, but I want to understand the deliberateness of this process to really address the issue of women entrepreneurs.
Achieng, thanks. It's an important question. And I think, like I said in the presentation, there's a number of challenges which we as Eskom wouldn't be able to solve on our own. So how do we work in partnership with others on addressing some of these questions? So one of the things we are looking at as part of the whole repurposing plan is entrepreneurship. And we've been talking to the DTIC and we've been talking to other businesses around how do we, through our own programs as well, promote entrepreneurship. So one of the things we're looking at in the communities is to look at a sort of a baseline to understand how much of this we have in the country in terms of entrepreneurs. And we're looking at entrepreneurs across the board, right? So male and female, but also disaggregating that to say, are there women that are able to take advantage of the entrepreneurship opportunities from a Just Energy Transition program? And if they are not, what needs to be put into place to upskill and train people in that respect? So that is the one aspect we're looking at. The other is, if we look at, we mustn't underestimate also the existing capability in the country. So, for example, one of the contracting strategies we are using for our plants is as you know, we go out to market when we're implementing projects. We've gone out to market for an owner's engineer. And the company that won that tender, the best company, was a woman owned and woman managed company. Excellent bunch of owners engineers, completely on merit. So even if we didn't apply any gender criteria to that. It was, they won that tender because they were the best company. So I think, and for us, it's great that we're able to employ an owner's engineer that is actually meeting the criteria of gender equity as well. So I think what we need to do is, and what was nice about that story is that they are linked to a multinational company, and the multinational actually in the past invested in developing women engineers and in developing, entrepreneurs in this field. So they were able to spin off their own little company into an owner's engineering company. So I think those are the kinds of programs we need to latch onto. We need to build on to develop more women in the field. So and maybe this is a controversial thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. And Achieng, you've known me for many years, right? Say what's on my mind. We must refrain from using the gender card. If we're applying for a job or if we're going in to do a specific thing, we must make sure we are skilled, we are upskilled. One of the things for me about being a woman in this field is you got to know your stuff. Where you don't know your stuff, you say, I don't know, actually, I need some upskilling. But that confidence comes from actually knowing your stuff. So I think we'll always have chances out there, but I think it's very important that we don't do ourselves a disservice by trying to get into things that we haven't actually put the effort and the graft into getting upskilled. So I think there's two sides to that coin. We absolutely need to drive more programs in the country on entrepreneurship and upskilling women. But as women, we also need to come to the party to make sure that we take advantage of those in the right way.
And I think that's really great insight, but it drives me to my next point then. What are the barriers? What is really preventing women from taking up these opportunities, especially the ones that are coming through the JET? What would those barriers be? Because we know our history as a country, we know the history of inequality. Yeah. So we can prop women up and say, hey, go grab the opportunities, but certain barriers exist. Within the energy sector, what are they in your view?
So I think, Ajing, some of the traditional barriers are still there where, and I'm not sure if and maybe the men on the call must tell me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure if we'll ever get over this barrier where when you walk into a room or you walk into a meeting as a woman, especially in a field that's dominated by men, you have to work doubly hard to prove yourself. And for me, what's so important is that if there are women, so one of the barriers is an immediate misconception or misunderstanding of the role of a woman in this kind of field. So for me, I think what's extremely important, one is if there are women already in these senior positions, women are already able to do the job, is to promote other women that are competent, that you know that can do the job, but perhaps are being held back by their own lack of confidence or by the fact that they're not being moved forward because they're women. And men, it's extremely important for men to also play that role where you identify women that are competent, women that are good, women that might be better than you, but you're mature enough and secure enough to say, actually, we need to fast track this woman because she can do this job. So I think that for me is still a barrier that we face. Maybe it's not so much in other industries, but definitely in the energy industry, we see it. I always say this so our chief executive, Andre de Ruyter, is extremely brilliant at not seeing the fact that you're a woman. He looks at your performance, your competence, and you get promoted or moved in that way due to your performance and competence. And I've actually had to point out to him that it's not all men that think that, and he's a great mentor for men actually to say, don't see that barrier of the fact that you're looking at a woman, look at her competence and what she's able to do. So I think men in senior positions play an important role in doing that, as do women in senior positions. But just one more thing I want to add is that it doesn't start in the workplace. It doesn't start in school and it doesn't start in primary school. It starts in your home as well. I was in a conversation recently with a relative who said that one of their client's son passed away, and the client runs an engineering company. And he was so sad because, he didn't have, his son was unwell, and he said, and he was sad because he didn't have someone to take over his business. So I said, oh, did he have only one child? He said, no, he's actually got a daughter. So I said, so why can't the daughter take over the business? And they're like, all right, yes, the daughter can take over an engineering business. So it's the mindsets starting at home. If you have daughters, just be very wary of what you say without thinking about, oh, a girl can't do that, because it's a boy's job, or a boy can't do that because it's a girl's job. It starts there. And I think we really need mindsets to change. I find with a lot of the young women we deal with, I think confidence is a problem. And that's because of some of the conversations that happen around them.
Thanks, Mandy. It's great that you bringing it down to a question of we need to shift our mindsets. It's a total mind shift that is required for women to be looked at as, bringing the same value or more than what, men bring as equal human beings. I wanted to go quickly, and I'll come to the chat question, so just bear with me. I want to lift this debate a bit to the international level, Mandy, because I know you've been involved in global negotiations, even from way back. I mean, you've been here for over 20 years and talked climate through and through. And I want to ask this question, acknowledging that we must move to a low carbon economy. I think that is no longer the debate. The debate is the pace of it. Who is dictating the pace of that transformation to a low carbon economy? And at the back of my mind, I know that energy really is at the core of the economy. So everything, when we talk about decarbonization, everything will shift. And I'll give you an example of the shipping industry. I was at the World Oceans Conference recently. The shipping industry globally is massive. And we saw what happened when COVID happened and the value chain was disrupted, how long you just needed to take to receive goods and some other services. If you look at that industry alone, if they were to decarbonize, and there's this discussion of moving from the current fuel to hydrogen or a cleaner mode of energy, and different countries are positioning themselves. I want to go back to the policy question. Who is controlling the pace of the transition? And given where our economy is, where we are physically as South Africa is almost to the southern tip, vis-a-vis the global market, are we at the global policy table?
I think that's a great question. And my glib answer to that is that the market is dictating the pace of change. If you look at, and I'll come back to this question of you didn't ask it, but I'll answer it anyway, of the Ukraine-Russia war and how that's impacting on energy policy. But if you look at the global market and the shift towards lower carbon technologies, the shift towards moving away from fossil fuels is driven globally. And people might say, oh, well, so why do we have to do anything about it? We, like you say, in the southern tip of Africa is a relatively small economy compared to the rest of the world. But this has a direct impact on South Africa. So if you look at our trade, right? So South Africa trades, as you know, in minerals. We export a number of goods all the way from PGM, the metals and the minerals industry, to cars, to things like wine, flowers, fruit. All of these commodities are being affected by the global shift towards a lower carbon economy. So if you look at, let's take a very simple example. Let's take the wine industry. We've had calls from the wine industry saying that, especially exporting into the European market, they're saying that the carbon footprint of the product is too high. And that's due to the electricity that we supply, right?
Yeah.
So the wine that is produced from electricity that has very high carbon content. So the exported product is too high in carbon content. And so the export market is saying, how do you reduce your carbon content? So a lot of the wine farmers are going off grid so that they can produce whatever they need to do through renewables. Same for the flower export market, same for the fruit export market. Where we've seen one of the biggest impacts is the automotive industry. So in our export market is mainly Europe for the cars we produce here, VWs, Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, BMWs, 3 Series, exported mostly to the European market and to the Japanese market. The European market is moving away from internal combustion engines towards electric vehicles. We will lose that export market in the next 5 to 10 years if we don't transition. So I think as much as we can sit, and put our heads in the sands and say, actually, we don't need to transition, our competitiveness as a country will suffer immensely if we don't transition. But what we do is we put some reality into the discussion to say, yes, we are a developing country. Yes, we've been dependent on coal for many, many decades. We cannot shift overnight. So if you look at energy policy in the country, which is woefully inadequate, but what energy policy in the country does at the moment is say it has a phase out plan for coal plants. So as much as you might see in the media that Eskom is against energy policy, Eskom is pushing decarbonization, it's actually in line with energy policy. The integrated resource plan has a schedule for plant shutdown, and we are following that schedule. But at the same time, we're saying we have to build about 50 to 60 gigawatts of variable capacity, renewable capacity in the country to meet the capacity gap that we currently have and we've got load shedding to show you that, but also the gap that's becoming cumulative the longer we take to build new plant.
Mandy, I don't know if I'm losing you or it's my Wi-Fi. Retabile, are we good?
Yes, yeah, I think it's Mandy. Let's just give a few minutes to reconnect.
Okay.
I'm sure she'll be with us. Just bear with us, please.
Not
Thank
a
you.
problem.
Sure.
Okay. I'm seeing the question and we'll take it in a moment. Apologies for that, it's technology.
She has just logged off. I'm sure she'll log in. And again, just give us a few minutes. As we wait for Mandy, please remember your questions in the chat. Please remember to put your questions in there as we wait for Mandy to reconnect.
There she is. Hi, Mandy, are you getting back? Okay.
Sorry, Acheng, I'm back. You lost me there for a second.
Yes. Carry on from where you left. I don't know if you remember where you left.
Yeah, I was talking about the European story. So,
yes,
you get a lot of people saying, well, why are you moving away or talking about decarbonization when Europe is going back to fossil fuels? But I think what's important to note there is that the coal and the gas that Germany, the Europeans, other Europeans, the UK is looking for is to fill the current gap that's been caused by the Russian-Ukraine war. So they're not getting in any more Russian gas. They need to look at an alternative source, and that is why they're buying coal to meet that stopgap or to stop the gap. But if you look at their transition plans, the UK, Germany, other European countries have actually accelerated their renewables transition plans because they want to move away from being dependent on Russia and from being dependent on other countries for fossil fuels. So in order to ensure their energy security, they've upped their transition plans. So like I say, these things are being driven by market forces, and we either get on the bandwagon or we actually get left behind.
Okay, no, that's great. Let me take one question from the audience before I come back with our last one. Our time is moving. Okay, so Londiwe asks, to Mandy, thank you for sharing such an insightful and well-put plan. Just curious, what is the uniqueness you have brought to the business jet office? Good question. And Londiwe was out. She's just coming back in.
All right. Do you want me to answer that?
Yes. Londiwe is asking what you brought into the JET office. I know, but you tell Londiwe.
So Londiwe's been interesting. I mean, Aching knows me for many, many years. Retibile knows me for many, many years. It's if you look at the past leadership in Eskom, if you look at the reticence around climate change, around renewable energy, it's actually been an uphill battle until now, until we've got the leadership now that supports a lot of the work that we're doing. But I think it was I think in tenacity, for me, it's what I'm doing is purpose driven. So it's not a job, it's a calling. In my view, I'm very, very privileged to be able to do a job that links directly with my calling in life. And
Mandy, we're losing you again, or at least
sorry,
I am.
I was muted by the host. You didn't like what I was saying. So I was saying that the job I'm in, I'm very, grateful that it's purpose-driven, driving an agenda towards sustainability, towards energy access for all, towards clean energy, towards jobs for all. And so I think it's just tenacity and not giving up on what you believe in is what brought us to where we are. And maybe, Retibile being ex-Eskom, been through the journey with us, could also add her view on that. But I think if you just believe in something and you drive it, the idea is to keep driving it. As much as you might nag people and step on people's toes and annoy people, at the end of the day, it's worth it. So, and then if you find yourself in a place where your values, your purpose is not in line with the place, then, maybe it's time to shift as well.
Thank you, Mandy. And I wanted to go back to, and the reason why I'm highlighting this is to also enable a deep understanding of what this transformation means for this economy, right? And of course, linking that to the opportunities that then exist for us to shift to a low carbon economy. You mentioned the motor industry as a good example of where if we didn't decarbonize, we would lose opportunities. Most of the motor industries in South Africa are global brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they would be transitioning. The European markets wants only electric vehicles by, it's a date coming up very soon. And so my question is, these are not South African brands, even though we benefit from jobs, from taxes, from just the manufacturing plants being here. If they are going to transform recording in elsewhere, right? Are we still together?
Yeah.
If the motor industry is transforming elsewhere, transitioning elsewhere, why won't they be transitioning in South Africa at the same pace as they would in Japan or Europe or elsewhere? And I know the answer might seem obvious, but I think we really need to highlight, again, the pace of change.
So you're asking why, for example, whether it be Toyota or BMW or VW is not transitioning. So remember the businesses in South Africa are South African businesses. They have a parent that's multinational, is international, but locally they are driven by local policies, local government regulations. And so we would need that those companies to be supported locally to transition. If you look at let's take electric vehicles. In order for our industries to transition, they would have to start manufacturing electric vehicles. But if you look at industrial policy at the moment in terms of import of components for electric vehicles, it's debilitating. It will put people out of business if they have to import those components in order to start building electric vehicles. So I think we also have to look at how local regulation supports or actually disables investment. So those are the kinds of things that need to happen, is a change of local policy, a change of how we do business here in order to support our multinational companies that are operating in South Africa.
Okay, and my final question is, what are the advantages that South Africa has when it comes to this transformation, the just transition? What advantages are those, and how do they then link up to women inclusion? Do we sit with any advantages as an economy?
We sit with massive advantages. If you look at, if you look at the wind and solar resource, for example, in South Africa, it is massive. I mean, if you go to any European country, it always astounds me. If you fly into Amsterdam, as you're flying over and you look out into the ocean, you just see wind farms everywhere. We don't even have to do that on the oceans. We have massive tracts of land where we have excellent wind resource. And like I say, people might say, oh, Mpumalanga doesn't have great wind resource, but it's better than Amsterdam. Wind resources, sun resources. We looked at the worst solar resource in South Africa is better than the best solar resource in Germany. So it's those kinds of advantages we have. We have highly skilled people that have worked in the energy industry, and I speak of the energy industry because that's the industry I know. But we have highly skilled people, and as we're not investing in new plant, as we're not transforming and transitioning, we're actually losing a lot of skills. So a lot of the young engineers that come in say they want to work in new industries, they want to work in renewables, they don't want to work in fossil fuels. That's a dying industry. So we need to take advantage of the highly skilled people we have, of the abundant resources we have. We currently have a good reputation with investors. That's dwindling a little bit due to some of our policy and the issues around corruption and risks in investing in South Africa. But we have little bubbles in the country that actually work. You need to go into those provinces and say, why do these things work? And if you look at it, it's because the governments, the local municipality, the local government is taking decisive action. And so I think there's so much potential, Acheng, in South Africa. There's so much potential for us to grow. We don't have to be dependent. I always use this analogy in that we can actually provide free tertiary education in this country. But, we just don't grab what's in front of us in terms of the potential of growing our economy and industrializing the economy as well. So I think we have a lot of advantages, but that is fast receding if we don't take advantage of it, and if we continue with policies that actually debilitate business in the country.
Thank you, Mandy. A quick one on, we cannot not talk about finance, especially for women. Do we have the required finance? Did the pledges come in? Are they coming in?
So it's not money on the table. It's not in my drawer. Yeah, it's still a pledge. So what we're doing is, like I said earlier, we're developing the investment plan that looks at, you can't, people are not going to write you a blank check. So you need to have an investment plan to say, this is our project pipeline. This is what's going to cost us the cash flows over the next however many years. This is what the money is that we need in 2020, 2021, whatever it might be. Sorry, I'm thinking of the past, of 2022, 2023, whatever that needs to be. And so that investment plan is in draft. It's for comment now with the international group. The Presidential Climate Finance Task Team is also commenting on it. But so that's the 8.5 billion. But we're also pursuing some bilateral discussions. So Komati Power Station, for example, we're speaking to another funder, and they've already pledged to fund Komati's decommissioning and the repowering and repurposing of Komati Power Station. So that's a discussion that's going to be, we will know the outcome of their approvals in the next month or so. So there's a number of funders that have committed. A lot of it is still pledges, but we also have to do the work to make sure that we can unlock that funding.
Okay, thank you very much, Mandy. Retabila, let me know if there are more questions. Anyone who wants to ask a question, please just raise your hand or type it in the chat. And I just wanted to say that we are all aware of the challenges that Eskom has gone through. So we're not assuming that is not on the table. The massive governance challenges that Eskom has gone through. Having said that, as citizens, we just hope that those are being sorted and we are moving to a more integrity-informed process as the largest energy provider in the country. But the reason why we really wanted this discussion is to begin to position women within the jobs that are coming or will be lost. How do we mitigate that? How do we ensure that we are growing the employment base? But for me, I think most importantly, or additionally important, was also how we position women for this new reindustrialization. You know, solar, battery storage. You know, when the president made that announcement about the opportunities in Mpumalanga, in my head, people are rushing there, but what kind of people are positioning themselves? Do they include women? The other thing that I think is not quite explored is the opportunities within battery storage. And I know it's a discussion for another day. So it's not just the solar and the wind and the gas that I think goes into the grid, but it's the storage component as well. And I understand that there's massive business opportunities in the battery storage itself. So Mandy, I want to just take this opportunity to thank you. If there are no more questions, I'll just ask you to say the closing statements, and then we will end the session. Thank you very much, Mandy.
Thank you so much, Acheng. I really appreciate the opportunity and very happy to, if people want to contact me to talk about these things further, my email address, I think, can be made available. But just to say that I think it's, what I said on that last slide about being yourself, because you bring unique capabilities and talents, and don't try to be somebody else. But for me, one of my go-to books that I reread over and over is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And it's about being purpose-driven. You pursue a purpose and happiness and success follows you. So I think for me, it's, and like I say, I know I am in a position where I'm privileged to be pursuing a purpose that fits in with my job. But I think, for me, if you're pursuing a purpose in your life, it really does make a difference to your outlook, to how you drive things, to how you make sure you get things done despite the barriers. So I'm not saying everything is rose-colored. There are huge barriers that we have to overcome. But if you know what you're driving towards, it makes it all that much better. So, find your purpose and drive your purpose. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And someone is asking if we will be able to circulate the presentation. That is okay. Thank you. We will circulate the presentation. There's a slide there for budding women entrepreneurs in the room. I think there's a lot that we didn't even begin to peel. There's a lot behind the surface that is going on. There are massive opportunities that are coming up through this just energy transition. There are also risks that we have to really be aware of. But for us, our job here is to create the awareness so that business can take action to support the process, but also so that we are aware of the opportunities and risks and the action that we need to take now to avert catastrophe in the future. So from my side, just to say thank you so very much for coming through today. It's the 31st of August. The work continues for us, as we all know. We won't pick it up again on the 1st of August next year. So we continue to do this work, to bring awareness, to provide the tools where necessary and guidance for us to change, to create the change that we want. We will, for those who may have not followed closely, or for others, we will put this onto our YouTube page for later viewing. So thank you very much, everyone, for creating time to attend. Retabile, I think back to you if you have anything more to add.
Nothing much to say, Dr. A, and just to say, Mandy, again, thank you for blessing us with your presence here, and to you, Dr. A, for facilitating those discussions. That was a thought-provoking, and really, again, back to you, Mandy, and to say thank you to you. It was really, really good. And our co-hosts, thank you. And to everybody here today, thank you so much for being here with us. And please, we can see the comments already in the chat saying this was a great session. Whatever you think of the session, please tag us on our social media. We are on LinkedIn, we are where else, Twitter, and we can tag us at Global Compact SA. Please, let's take the discussion forward as we close Women's Month today. And thank you again, everybody, and bye-bye. And also, lastly, the survey, please remember to fill the survey so we can know how to serve you better. If there's any other topics you want for us to include for future Compact series. So thank you again, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you,
Until
everyone.
next time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mandy.